Today I'd like to make a couple of stocks with you so that you can master the technique. Along the way, I'll help you understand how stocks are categorized based on the ingredients that give them flavor and on their method of preparation. Now, one little warning, it can take a long time, figure 12 hours or more. So, what I would like you to do is set aside a weekend when there's not a lot going on, and once your stocks are on the stove, they don't demand a lot of your attention. Let's get started. Okie doke, we're going to get started with chicken stock, which is a white stock, which means that the bones and the meat and the vegetables are not browned at all. What I have here in front of me is some chicken bones. These have been rinsed already. I've got the carcass with a little bit of attached meat. I've got some wings. I've got some leg bones. And I even have a little chicken foot. The wings and the feet have a lot of gelatin, and so they'll give us a much richer stock with body in a way that commercial stocks don't have body. What I'm going to do is take these bones and put them right into a pot that has cold water in it. It's good to start with cold water because our goal is to draw the flavor out of these bones, not seal it inside. This is going to come up to a simmer, and as it does, all the protein that is water soluble will begin to coagulate with the heat, and it will float up to the top, and I can skim it off. And by skimming it off, I'll end up with a stock that is much clearer for my having skimmed it. Now, over here is a stock that's been cooking for about 2 hours, but I didn't skim it yet, and I just want to give you a chance to see that process. So here you'll see a little bit of scum on the top, there's some fat on the top, and you come in with a ladle and gather up all that scum and the excess fat, and we'll put it into a bowl on the side and just get rid of it. This should happen as soon as it comes up to a boil, and then you can skim it, every half an hour or so, something like that. Start to finish, this stock is going to take about 4 hours to cook, and this one's already been cooking for about 2. All right, I'll set that aside. Let's come on back over here. I've got some vegetables. This is called mirepoix. This is 50% onions, 25% carrots, 25% celery. And these vegetables have been cut up so that in the last 2 hours of our stock cooking, they will give up their flavor. A ratio for a stock is about 8 pounds of bones per 1 pound of mirepoix, and it gives you about a gallon of stock. Anyhow, I'm going to bring these vegetables over, and for the last 2 hours of this stock's cooking, I'm going to introduce vegetables in there as well. Now, there's one last little piece of flavoring that I need to talk to you about. What the French would call this is a sachet d'épices, or a little bag of spices. They would take parsley, bay leaf, peppercorns, and thyme, and you can even put a clove of garlic in if you like, and gather that all up into what is in effect a tea bag. Now, I know that we're going to be straining this stock, so I'm not going to go to that effort. I'm just going to put all those things into the stock. We'll set this aside, we'll stir it, and that will need a couple of hours to cook for the vegetables to give up their flavor. Well, this is cooking. Let me just share this with you, that traditionally, a stock pot is something that looks more like this, a narrower pot that's deeper and holds more. The idea is that with a narrow pot, you get less evaporation, and with a taller pot, it takes up less real estate on the stovetop. I chose a shallower pot so that it would be easier for you to see what I'm doing. So we'll set this aside, and I want to take you all the way down to this last pot. This is a stock that has the mirepoix added, it has the spices and the herbs added, and what I would like you to notice is that if you come in here and manipulate these bones, they are just at the point where they will fall apart easily, joint upon joint. The meat is all tender, and the bones come apart very, very easily. This took about 4 hours to get us to this point. If the bones are not falling apart, we probably haven't drawn as much flavor out of them as we could. If they fell apart 2 hours ago and I continued to cook for 2 more hours, the flavors would start to get dark and deep and a little bit muddy. So what you might consider doing is, as your stock is cooking, periodically, after about 2 hours, go in here and just give it a little taste. See what you think about the flavor. Is it still watery? Does it have body? Does it have a good full chicken flavor? Is the flavor starting to get a little tired and muddy? And do this once or twice while you make a chicken stock, and very quickly you will start to recognize what a good stock is and when it should come off the heat. All right, that last stock is ready to be strained. And so I'm going to strain it right into this glass bowl so that it's easy for you to see. I'm going to strain it right through a colander. Some people might suggest that you could strain it through cheesecloth, or if you don't have cheesecloth, you could use a kitchen towel at home. I'm going to strain it through the colander just because it's a little bit easier. Pour it away from yourself so you don't burn yourself by splashing hot liquid on you. And these bones, once you've strained the liquid off of them, can be discarded. Okay, our stock is done now. We strained it through a colander. I'm going to strain it through something a little bit finer, and you'll see that we'll get a lot of particulate that comes out. And we'll set this aside. This stock right now is ready to be used, or we could take this and it could be chilled down and go into the refrigerator for about a week, or we could freeze it and it would keep easily for 3 months. But what I would like to do is kind of evaluate the quality of this stock. So I'm going to put some in a glass here. Set this aside for just a second. And I have it lined up side by side with 4 other commercial chicken stocks that I bought. So first I want to taste this one. It has a nice clean flavor. I can smell the herbs, but mostly what I smell is chicken. And it doesn't smell dirty. It doesn't smell old or muddy or tired or reheated. It smells actually very fresh. I'm going to give it a little sip. And it might shock you because there is no salt in this. We haven't seasoned it. But that's by design. If you salt it now, later on in cooking, when you reduce it, it will get too salty. And so that's a problem. We want this to be as versatile as it possibly can be. So no odd spice flavors in here and not too much salt. In fact, no salt whatsoever. Now, it needs an appropriate color. Likewise, it needs a texture. And the texture of this comes from the gelatin that was in the bones. And then finally, it needs a full and appropriate flavor. And by that, I mean it should taste like chicken. It shouldn't taste too much of celery or of herbs or of carrots or of onions. It should taste like chicken. And this one does a pretty good job with that. Right next door, we've got a stock that is much, much lighter. It has almost no aroma to speak of. So compared to this, it smells like I'm smelling water. I'm going to go ahead and tell you that on the label, it was made, and the first ingredient was chicken meat, which I think is a good sign. But meat doesn't have as much gelatin, so it doesn't have the same body as my stock. It is really salty, and it tastes actually pretty good right now, but if I tried to cook with this and reduce it, it would go from being really salty to way too salty. I like the color of it. I like the fact that it's sort of a blonde stock. This one right here is a little bit cloudy, and that's not uncommon when you make stocks from meat rather than from bones. This one is organic. It does have a little bit of chicken aroma, which I like very much. This is a low sodium, and it's also a low fat, but none of these will have very much fat in them. This tastes almost exclusively like vegetables. If I didn't know any better, I'd say this is a vegetable stock. I taste onions, carrots, celery, and herbs. So it has no body whatsoever. Over here, it starts to get a little bit darker. This particular stock is also organic. It has rosemary added to it for some reason. And when you add rosemary, suddenly you can only use this for preparations that have rosemary in it. So it's no longer as versatile as it was over here. Doesn't smell like much. Smells actually a little woody, if you can imagine such a thing. This is flavored with autolyzed yeast extract. So instead of meat, it's got vegetable protein. It's a low-sodium broth, and it tastes disgusting. I wouldn't even know where to begin, but I would not want to put this in the food that I ate. And then finally, way over here on the end, this was all natural and more than gourmet. It smells a little bit like soy sauce. It's very, very dark. The chicken that goes into this is chicken, yes, but also chicken skin and chicken fat. So those flavors. It has tapioca starch to give it body, not gelatin. And it has the mirepoix and the sea salt. Again, it doesn't taste like chicken. It tastes like the starch that gives it body. And anytime chicken stock doesn't taste like chicken, I think you've got a problem. I think we made a pretty good showing for ourselves. This is what you want, and I would encourage you to taste your own stock exactly the same way. And if you have any of these products in your pantry, by all means, break them out and compare them to the stock that you just made. Once you know what good chicken stock tastes like, then you will never buy these ever again. Okay, we've made a white stock. Now we're going to make a brown stock. We're going to make a brown veal stock. And the only difference, or one of the few differences, is that the meat and the vegetables both will be browned ahead of our cooking them in liquid. I've got veal bones right here. These are veal neck bones, and no matter how good a butcher you are, you'll always leave a little bit of meat. Now, some people make a distinction between broth and stock, and they would say that a broth is cooked with more meat. It has more of a meaty flavor. Bones give you gelatin and body. Meat gives you sort of a meaty flavor. So this is really a great selection of bones here from the neck of veal. Veal also has a lot of gelatin as a young animal. You can find these in a butcher shop. If you go to the meat counter in a supermarket, you can probably find some sort of bones. And I would step up and talk to the person behind the counter, and they can offer something like this up to you. These need to be roasted. I've got a roasting pan right here, and so I'm going to add a little bit of oil in the bottom. And then the bones just get dumped right on in. And what I'm going to do is take these and I'll put them into the oven at about 400 degrees, and I think they'll take maybe, let's say, 45 minutes to an hour to roast. All right. The pan is hot, but there's our veal bones. You can see they're nicely browned. That's exactly what we're looking for. I've got a pot of cold water right here. And the first thing we're going to do is take these bones, sort of gather them up, free them from the bottom of the container, and those we're going to put right into this pot. Now, in the bottom of this, just the same way you saw when we sautéed, there's a little bit of fond, and I want to make sure that we try and capture that. So in goes a little bit of water, and we can just deglaze this pan. You can even turn the heat on. And what you'll notice is that the color of the fond will start to color the water, And this is really where your stock begins, right here. Something with a flat end on it like this is great for scraping up the bottom. It'll only take you a minute or two, but it's well worth the effort. Okay, so in the case of a veal stock like this, it cooks for, I would say, 6 to 8 hours, depending on how big the bones are cut. As you can see that the liquid is reduced. Oftentimes in professional kitchens, what you'll see is they will allow this to cook overnight. They'll just let it simmer very, very gently. The last person at the end of the night puts it on. The first person in the morning takes it off. So let's imagine for a second this is cooked for about 6 hours. We're going to put vegetables in. And I've got mirepoix all laid out with the addition of tomato paste. And all of these as well need to be browned. So take a look at what I've got here. There are vegetables. The onions were browned in hot fat. And then the carrots and the celery went in. And then at the very end, I put in tomato paste, and I cooked the tomato paste so that it went from a nice bright red to sort of a brickish red. That gives it a much deeper, fuller flavor. And all of these vegetables can be put into the stock. Now, last but not least, I have a stock here that's simmered for the 2 additional hours. That's enough time for the flavor to come out of the vegetables. Before too much time goes on, let me just take this sachet de piece, which has in it the parsley stems, the bay leaf, the peppercorns, thyme, and we'll add that right into the stock that is still simmering. So here is a stock that has simmered for the requisite amount of time. This will look a little bit different from the chicken stock. These bones won't fall apart quite so readily. But I would encourage you to do just what I suggested before, which is taste it periodically. You're looking for a full, meaty flavor. You're looking for body. You're looking for the flavor of the vegetables and the herbs to also be there. And when you start to see the flavors getting a little muddy, that's the time to pull it off. As I said, this is 6 to 8 hours. So this is going to come off, and we're going to strain it. Be a little bit careful. Now, one of the challenges, if you strain through a fine mesh cheesecloth early on, is it may get clogged with some of the particulate. And so you have to milk it a little bit like this. So now we've got a brown stock. This is an investment in time of about 8 hours. This stock will keep very, very well if I chill it down and refrigerate it. It can be in the refrigerator for, I would say, as long as a week, or I can freeze it. One other thing you'll see is this right here. This is called a glace. And glace is this stock that's cooked down, 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 down until most of its moisture has been removed. Think of it almost like a commercial base that you can add water back to, and you have a stock again. So this is glace. In this case, glace de viande, or veal glaze. Imagine that this stock was made with beef bones. This would be beef stock. If it were made with lamb bones, they might only cook for 6 hours, and you would have a lamb stock. And you could even take the same chicken bones that we made a white stock from and brown them first and have a brown poultry stock. A quick taste. It has body. It has body. There's no bitterness, and bitterness might come from over-browning the bones or over-browning the vegetables. There's none of that. It has the gelatinous feel that comes from young veal bones. It tastes of roasted meat, and that's exactly what you want. Again, there is no salt in this, so that we could cook it down all the way to this consistency without worrying about it becoming over-seasoned or too salty. The last thing I would say about this is try and cool it down quickly. So I might put this into a larger bowl of ice water, and that will take the heat out of it very quickly. The faster we can get it in the refrigerator, the longer it will last. That's it. This is exactly how a brown stock is made. There's one more stock I'd love to show you, and that's a fish stock. Sometimes it's called a fish fumet. It's made so gently that you can see the steam just rising off the pot, and then it's done. The reason I wanted to separate this out is that the flavors of fish are easily destroyed. So we don't want to cook this too long or too hard. The fish bones that I have here come from any sort of white fish that doesn't have a lot of fat. So salmon is out, mackerel is out, sardines are out, but cod, sole, any of those lean white fish I think are appropriate. This I think is a flounder, and so I've got flounder or halibut bones right here. What we're going to do to start with is take these bones and we're going to sweat them, which is to say cook them without coloring them, in a pot that has a little bit of oil in the bottom. And what will happen here, before I do, let me just share with you that these bones have been cleaned pretty well and rinsed. If there's any blood or any guts in there, those need to come out. The gills come out, the head comes off. These are just cleaned bones cut into small pieces. Okay, so I'll take these and slide them right in here. And I'll tell you what I'm looking for. Fish bones are so delicate that as they cook, they will begin to fall apart almost immediately. And if I start with this pot halfway full or 3/4 of the way full with fish bones, by the time they've cooked for even 5 minutes, the volume will reduce by about 1/3 to 1/2. Take care that you don't color these bones. We want this stock to be a nice light color. If you think about fish preparations, a lot of the fish that you eat is almost white or pearly white. And if we had a stock that was dark, that wouldn't be very good. Okay, so these fish bones, as you can see, are starting to fall apart. First, the meat falls off the bones, and then the bones themselves begin to collapse and mat down. I've got some mirepoix, and we're going to add mirepoix to our stock just the way we did with each of our other stocks. But what you're seeing here is what I call a white mirepoix. Carrots are out because we want to keep a nice light stock, and we've replaced them with mushrooms and parsnips. So these vegetables can all go in here as well. The sachet de piece is there. Take care that it doesn't catch on the bottom and begin to brown. As I said, we want a nice white stock. Okay, the liquid that goes into a fish stock like this is water and wine. We're choosing a Sauvignon Blanc here, which has a nice hit of acidity. This acidity is important to balance what otherwise might come across as a little bit fishy. So I would say this is going to be about 1/5 wine and 4/5 water. And we want the bones to just barely be covered with liquid. The more water we put in here, the longer we're going to have to cook it later on to reduce it to get the flavor we want. And the more we cook it and the more we reduce it, the longer this cooks and the fish flavor starts to get muddy very, very quickly. So we'll bring this up to a simmer. We'll skim it very, very well. And when we're done, we'll have a stock that looks just like this over here. Now, you can see that these bones have come completely apart. The vegetables have given up their flavor. It's got a great smell. It smells nice and fresh. And I've already shown you any number of times how to strain a stock. So what I have is some stock here that's already been strained. And what I would like to do is just taste it real briefly. Nice light color. It tastes of fish. You can taste the acidity from the wine, which balances the flavor of fish. It has body. The body comes from the bones. I would say with this stock especially, you need to be really careful to chill it down immediately and get it into the refrigerator because fish likes to spoil very, very quickly. Start to finish, this stock probably takes you no more than 45 minutes or an hour. So I am of a mind that if I'm using a fish stock on any given day, I make it that day. That way it'll always be fresh and clean and bright tasting like the sea rather than starting to taste fishy. So here's a fish stock. I'm going to show you two other options for stocks that you might find interesting. Here is shellfish bones. Now, shellfish don't have their bones on the inside like finfish do. They carry their bones on the outside in the form of shells. Shrimp shells, lobster shells. This makes a really delicious stock. I would do exactly the same thing. I might saute these shells first in hot oil and then add the mirepoix. It will give up its flavor within about an hour and you'll have a delicious shellfish stock. But stocks don't have to be all about meat and fish. You could also make a vegetable stock. And so I would take the basic mirepoix, onions, celery, carrots. I would add them to fresh water. And then if you want some more complexity, some meatiness might come from mushrooms, and a little bit of anise flavor could make its way in there from fennel. Obviously, I would add a sachet d'épices to this. And this, depending on how you cut the vegetables, would give up its flavor usually within about 45 minutes or an hour. I would probably cut these vegetables up very, very finely so that we don't have to leave it on for a long time. One last thing. If you come over here and take a peek, this first fish stock that I made is just now coming up to a boil, and it's throwing off a certain amount of scum. This is the protein that is in suspension, and as it boils, it rises up to the top. And if you want a nice clean stock, I would say now would be the time to reach for a ladle and skim that off so that you can discard it. And now the payoff. We've made all these stocks, but what do you do with them? Well, I'd like to make a really simple chicken soup for you that is made from the stock that we had from earlier. What I have here is chicken stock that's cooking, and cooking in that chicken stock is actually a little piece of meat, a chicken leg that's cooked until it's nice and tender, and the meat can be plucked from the bone and shredded. I've done that already, and I've got it right here. We're going to turn this pot of stock into a really delicious soup. The first thing I would say is taste the stock. You want to make sure that it has enough flavor. You could always reduce it a little bit more and concentrate the flavor, but for right now, and because of all the meat that we cooked in there, it tastes great. I'm going to season it right away with a little bit of salt and pepper. And then here is a selection of vegetables. I've got mushrooms and mirepoix. I sweat the onions until they were translucent. I sauteed the mushrooms, and everything here is ready to go right into the pot. Now, I could start this in the pot. I could sweat the onions in there first and then add the mushrooms and build it that way. But I wanted this to go fairly quickly. I'm going to add also this meat that's been shredded. I like the idea of a chicken noodle soup, and so here is some noodles that have been cooked already. And then finally, just to give it some freshness, I'm going to add some herbs. And so here is some parsley. I've got some tarragon that we just pulled out of the garden, and I'm going to strip that from the stem as well. And here is a little bit of thyme. Those three should make for a really, really tasty soup. The stems I'm taking and discarding just because they're really woody and they wouldn't eat very well. That's fine for a stock because we're going to strain it out. But now we want to strip off just the more tender leaves. Gather this all up and chop. I can smell, you can't, but I can smell exactly what these herbs are going to lend to this soup. There's the aromatic anise flavor that's coming from tarragon, and there's the grassiness and the sweetness that's coming out of parsley, and then sort of a resinous quality from thyme. All goes in. Now, you could let this simmer for 5 or 10 minutes. Just be careful you don't cook it so long that the pasta falls apart. But this soup is basically done, save for the fact that I need to check the seasoning one last time. Don't be shy about adding salt. As I dip in here, I want to make sure that I get plenty of the goodies. I want chicken, I want pasta, I want the vegetables, and already the herbs have flavored this broth in a really, really nice way. There you go. All right, one last little piece of advice before we wrap things up. Just because we're making stock and we have a stock pot on the stove, don't use it as a garbage can. You want good quality ingredients because if you use bad quality ingredients, you will be haunted by those bad flavors all the way until that stock is gone. Likewise, pay attention to the technique. Don't boil your stock really hard. Otherwise, the fat may emulsify, and now you've got a big old chicken milkshake on the stove, not a really nice, clear stock. That's it for stocks. We'll have these things tucked away in our refrigerator, and we will reference them again and again across this course. Next lesson, stir frying, which is really nothing more than dry heat cooking with fat that just happens to have a Chinese passport.